Good afternoon. So I'm back with part 2 as promised, here with my blanket all snug, ready to fill you in of more about the Vampire of Düsseldorf, also known as Peter Kurten. So we left off with Ida Reuter, who was Peter's last victim, and she was on a date with him. They'd been to a cafe and on a walk, and he had killed her with a hammer. She had been attacked by the hammer and he was really brutal. He said she wouldn't die and he carried on hitting her with the hammer anyway and just continued. She did, however, survive, and she was in a coma, and the following day she did unfortunately pass away. So she was the next murder victim of Peter Kurten, and she was there is only one more victim after this, and it's a young girl, and he killed this young girl only 11 days after Ida's murder. So this little girl, she was the last victim, and she, to me, in my opinion, she was one of the most brutalist ones the most brutal killing that he'd done. So as previously stated, I don't like child killings and things, and I don't want to go into things like that because it's disgusting. It is sick what he did to her. So, but that was his actual last murder. He continued, that would be the pleasure of all pleasures. I always find it really interesting of what people will choose for their last meal on death row, and you know, the final supper. What would you choose on your last meal? Oh my god, my plate would be full of everything. Like I can't choose, so I'll have a bit of everything. But he did choose to have a bottle of wine, a wiener schnitzel, and some fried potatoes. That was Peter Kurten's choice for his last meal, before he was going to his execution. Following Peter Kurten saying this to the psychiatrist, he was then put in the guillotine, ready to be beheaded by a very popular executioner. Executioners can be popular in those days. His name was Karl Kroppler, and he was to execute Peter Kurten. And before Peter Kurten was put to death, he asked if he had any last words, and he simply replied, no. That was his final words, were the words no. We all love a good piece of history, as stated previously, that they have a wheel at the museum in Berlin, as of from previous story about Christmas. So the same goes, kind of the same goes with Peter Kurten. His head has actually been kept and mummified. It was after his death, well, after he was executed, they dissected his head to see whether there was anything significant that they could see to the brain, any damage, because a lot of people are aware that serial killers do often have some kind of damage to the brain when they're young, or other things, or other abnormalities, which can be partially the reason for them becoming serial killers. So they checked him out. There was no abnormalities. There was nothing to show a mental, like not a mental, but like any signs on his brain to show that this was the cause. And this is now available to go and see in the US at Ripley's Believe It or Not. So yeah, so another piece of history left for us to actually be able to view. So that could be a second place on my bucket list. One Berlin and then one the US to go and see his mummified head at Ripley's Believe It or Not. It's dissected right through the middle. Or is it bisected? No, bisected, not dissected. So after this, between February and May 1930, Peter Kurten did do 10 more other attacks that we know of, that we're aware of, 10 further attacks, but all these victims survived. He was still using his hammer at this point, I think, and during all this, his hammer did break during one of the attacks, so that could possibly be the reason that this person survived, or people survived, as he did generally do it on individual attacks. So he's obviously had 9 that were lucky enough to escape him, and the 10th where the hammer was broken during the attack, so they managed to survive and get away from him. Then on the 14th of May 1930, things started coming to a head with it all, with the investigation. So what happened, this is just a crazy story, and this poor woman what a shit day she had. She'd arrived at the train station at Düsseldorf train station. She was 20 years old and she was looking for a hostel to stay in. She was actually approached by a man that was that said he would help her find a hostel. He knew where to go. He knew, you know, where she could stay, how to get there. So she followed this gentleman, and she realised he was taking her to like a scarcely populated park in heading towards that direction, and she thought, hey, something's up here. Like, there's hardly anybody around. So she started an argument. They was arguing because she's like, obviously, no, don't take me, I know what's going on, blah, blah, blah. So then she gets another man come to the rescue. So she thinks, hey, oh, a good guy coming to the rescue, like you do, you know. But unfortunately, that person was Peter Kurten that was coming to the rescue. Oh, no. This lady was called Maria Budlick, and she actually Peter escorted her to his actual apartment. So she went to his apartment and she had some food and drink, and she's like, look, I'm not interested in having sex with you. That is not, I just want to find this hostel, find employment. So he's like, all right then, let's get going. So he did head towards what she thought was a hostel, and it seemed he was doing the exact same as what the previous guy were doing. He lured her into a secluded area where he strangled and raped her. He was strangling her, and he actually let go and let her go. He just let her go, which is crazy because he rarely, well, not that we know of, that he actually let somebody go on purpose. And this lady knew where he lived. She'd been to his house and he's just let her go. Maybe he was at the end of his tether with it. Maybe he couldn't be bothered. He'd wrote all these letters to the police and media, trying to get all this attention. Even sent them a map of where Hans' body was left for all this attention, and he must have just been fed up of it. He wasn't getting I think he was hoping that he'd get good publicity, or I don't know what went through his head, but he obviously wasn't getting out of it what he was hoping to get out of it with these cocky letters and the map and things. I don't know if he'd 9-10 killings, about 20 attempted murders, however many rapes. It's just, he must have just had enough. So after this, he went home to his wife and he confessed. He confessed that he was the vampire of Düsseldorf. He must have known that things were coming to a head, definitely. So although Marie Budlick had a very close call with death, she didn't actually go to the police about Peter. And she knew his name, she knew where he lived. So instead of reporting it to the police, she actually wrote a letter to her friend telling her about the incident and what had happened. And it was her friend that had actually... Oh, no, it wasn't a friend. No. She wrote a letter to a friend, and somebody at the post office actually opened the letter. I'm unsure why, but she opened the letter, read this letter. It must have been one of them, where they've not got the right address nor postcode or something, I don't know. And she'd opened the letter herself, the post office lady, and read it and thought, oh my God, this needs reporting to the police. So she actually took the letter to the police. So it was due to this postwoman that initially got the investigation in full swing. So the police then contacted Maria and was like, what the hell? Can you tell us where he lives then? And she told him where he lived, and they headed towards, obviously, well, they must have planned it for a little bit, and then obviously they would have been on the way to go and get Peter Kurten at his house. But as I said previously, Peter Kurten had gone to his wife and said, look, I'm the vampire of Düsseldorf. There's a reward going for my capture. Why not hand me in? You get the refunds. You get the reward and you're set for life, and then we don't have to, it's not both of us suffering. I'll be in prison, you have a cushy life. And so that's pretty much what they did. So when the police got to his property, he actually wasn't there. His wife was just there, and she said, which I'm guessing was a plot, like they'd planned this. She's planned to meet him outside this church at such a date, such a time. So they went, obviously guns guns a-blazing and took him down outside this church where it was apparently meant to meet his wife, but I think it was just obviously set up so that she didn't look like she was involved and what have you. So yeah, so that's how he was caught. So when he was arrested, he did admit to doing these things, and I think at first he pleaded not guilty, but then he changed his plea to guilty after he confessed that he did this as revenge on society for actually locking him up in prison. This is what it says, but we just, you know he's a bit nuts. Although proven that there was nothing wrong with his brain after he died, but we'll go to that afterwards. During his interviews, he did admit to the murder of 10 people, so actually who he killed, and then 30 attempted murders, so that's 40 in total. But that's coming from Peter himself, so it could be more, it could be less. Like I've said earlier, people confess to more crimes, people underestimate the crimes. So, but he did go to court and then he got found guilty of nine of the murders. Also got done for seven counts of attempted murder too, as well as probably a string of rape charges, assault charges. Probably had charges coming out of his ears basically. Also, if you can hear like a weird noise in the background, my daughter's off poorly, so she's got Encanto on full blast in the next room, so I'm trying not to sing along. Also made it pretty clear that everything he did was for his own sexual gratification, and after he had actually got that gratification from his victims, he did say that he felt slightly guilty afterwards, but I don't believe that. I think that might have just been a ploy to try and soften the blow, maybe, because he didn't care about anybody or anything other than himself, and for some weird reason it seemed that he did actually love his wife. Like, I wonder how she felt about all this. Imagine knowing that your husband has been killing women left, right and centre, and you've been with him and like sleeping with him that whole time, although he did say that he rarely ever slept with her, and if he did, it was only because she initiated it. He also confessed to drinking the blood of 3 of his victims, and obviously he killed a swan as well. He chopped its head off and drank the blood from apparently one or 2 swans. So that must have been on a desperate night. But like I said, we know that Hans, that she was one of the victims who was bloody drank, and one of the very young girls, I'm not sure who the third one was, but I'm guessing it was the other young girl, maybe something to do with the young girls that he got the most pleasure from drinking from the wounds from. Just disgusting. Not bad enough that he kills them and like mutilates them, but he has to do that as well. Like, come on, mate. I'm really wondering if his wife ended up getting the reward money. I'm gonna have to dig a little deeper to find that out, because I really did actually want to know that, or whether they just presumed that she was innocent and knew nothing. And was obviously found guilty, like I said, 9 accounts of murder and 7 accounts of attempted murder, and yet found guilty, and he was given capital punishment, and his chosen, well, not his chosen, because you don't choose your own capital punishment, he was set to be executed by the guillotine. While getting ready for his execution, he was escorted by the prison psychiatrist, who took him and introduced him to the guillotine. Like, basically said, look, here's the guillotine, this is where it's going to end for you. So it was 91 years ago that Peter Kurten was put to death by the guillotine for his crimes. This was on July the 2nd, 1931, at age just 48 years old. When the psychiatrist was with Peter at the guillotine, Peter turned round to him and said, "Tell me, after my head has been chopped off, will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my neck?" He didn't even try and defend himself and the reasons for what he did, because obviously, so I finally realised what he did was appalling, disgusting behaviour, and there's no, he couldn't give a good reason for it really, other than just saying it was the revenge thing. But I think by the time it gone to the courts and he thought about it, like, his actions were demonic. It's like his sadism, isn't it? Sadist. He was just evil, pure evil. So he didn't appeal anything, didn't do any petitions to get out of the capital punishment, didn't do anything other than ask for to be granted, to be allowed to write to his victims' families to apologise. So to me, that does show a kind of remorse. But again, could it be because he didn't want to go through this capital punishment? Maybe he just wanted to be in prison for life, and he wanted to do this to show that it was a bit more human than he's made out to be, because he is a monster. We can't hide the fact that he's a true living evil monster. So how else would he be able to get out of being put to death? The only way you could think of was writing to the families and apologising, accepting your actions, like, you know. He also got to write a letter to his wife, and all these letters were allowed. He was actually allowed to do it before he was put to death. So let's go back. He continued, that would be the pleasure of all pleasures. I always find it really interesting of what people will choose for their last meal on death row, and, you know, the final supper. What would you choose on your last meal? Oh my god, my plate would be full of everything. Like, I can't choose, so I'll have a bit of everything. But he did choose to have a bottle of wine, a wiener schnitzel, and some fried potatoes. That was Peter Kurten's choice for his last meal, before he was going to his execution. Following Peter Kurten saying this to the psychiatrist, he was then put in the guillotine, ready to be beheaded by a very popular executioner. Executioners can be popular in those days. His name was Karl Kroppler, and he was to execute Peter Kurten. And before Peter Kurten was put to death, he asked if he had any last words, and he simply replied, no. That was his final words, were the words no. We all love a good piece of history. As stated previously, that they have a wheel at the museum in Berlin, as of from previous story about Christmas. So the same goes, kind of the same goes with Peter Kurten. His head has actually been kept and mummified. It was after his death, well, after he was executed, they dissected his head to see whether there was anything significant that they could see to the brain, any damage, because a lot of people who are aware that serial killers do often have some kind of damage to the brain when they're young, or other things, or other abnormalities, which can be partially the reason for them becoming serial killers. So they checked him out. There was no abnormalities. There was nothing to show a mental, like, not a mental, but like any signs on his brain to show that this was the cause. And this is now available to go and see in the US at Ripley's Believe It or Not. So, yeah, so another piece of history left for us to actually be able to view. So that could be a second place on my bucket list. One Berlin and then one the US to go and see his mummified head at Ripley's Believe It or Not. It's dissected right through the middle. Or is it bisected? No, bisected, not dissected. The executioner would be told whether to hang people, to behead people, to cause pain and torture to somebody. And you've all seen it, the long robes with the black hood and just the eyes. That's your stereotypical executioner in it. So there with the axe to behead people, and that's how it was. That's actually how it was. This probably goes so far back, it is unreal, but we are really well aware of it from between the 15th and 16th century, and it only actually got exonerated in 1972. Like, how crazy is that? Can you believe they were still doing things like this in 1972? The executioner, Karl Kroppler, his career spanned over 30 years, and within these 30 years he had executed at least 144 people. And in some cases, not in Carl's case, but in most cases, as an executioner, it would pass down in the family. But with Carl, his assistant did take over after he was forced to retire. But he used to do his executions with a black top hat, white gloves. I think everyone was pretty scared of him as well. It was a bit creepy. He'd go to like his shed before executions. He generally used an axe in most of his executions, but would sometimes use his guillotine. But he would be in the shed. You could hear him filing away at the metals, hammering away in things, and obviously it was creepy, as it should be. For most of these people that were executed, it was the least they deserved. So as I said, France had the Samson family, who was one of the most popular, well-known executioners. So there were 6 members of the family that followed one after the other. Then we had a family in England that had 3 members do it one after the other. In Japan, it doesn't work like that. In Japan, they just used to have one of the prison guards doing the dirty work for them. This is the bit I've been excited to talk about. This is the executioner lady from Ireland called Lady Betty. This is a crazy story. It's only a quick one, but this is crazy. So this Lady Betty got the job as a hangwoman, not a hangman, she's a hangwoman. On the day she was due to be executed via hanging, her along with 25 other people were due to get executed. The person that was carrying the executions out got ill. This lady then offered the actual judge, courts, whatever it was, the police, the prison, offered to take down these other 25s, help them with the hanging, so that she could just be put in a prison for the rest of her life instead. Instead of being put to death, I'll do this for you and then you let me live, but in a prison cell. And she got the job. She executed these 25 other people and she got herself a new job. So from this day, she continued on as the executioner for the sheriff. I think it was the sheriff then. So I think it'd be really, really interesting to follow on from this to do a story about Lady Betty and her life and how she came to be one of the people to be hanged, one of the 26 people on that day. How crazy is that though? Imagine how small the population would have been back then, and they're hanging 26 people a day. So yep, she got the job. I think it'd be interesting to look at her history and her being a female executioner. And the sheriff did get like abuse for having a woman hangman. How would you say it? A hangwoman? Having a hangwoman. So that's the story of Peter Kurten, the vampire of Düsseldorf, the Düsseldorf monster. Düsseldorf, I can't say it. And a bit about the executioners. And I hope you enjoyed it. I've actually really enjoyed looking it all up for you and sharing things with you, and hopefully I'll have another one out for you in the next few days about this Lady Betty that I'm excited about. It's always nice to hear a bit more about bad women, badass women that nobody else discusses about. So this Lady Betty, I'd never even heard of her up until doing the Christman, the video on Christman. So yeah, have a lovely rest of your week, and I will hopefully see you at some point this week again. If you wanna follow me or subscribe to me, that'd be great, and then you won't miss out on the next video. And if I said any dates or names wrong, my memory is like Dory memory, so I'm sorry and I apologise.